And then go ahead, Jason, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your topic?
Absolutely. And I was working with Mike Pavic. Mike reached out to me and asked me if I'd be open to presenting. So I should say that because it's the Marine Corps birthday today, and I'm a Marine, I figured this would be a fitting day to present. So cheers to all the Marines out there, and happy Veterans Day in advance for everyone else that will be celebrating tomorrow. When Mike reached out to me, I said, I've got a presentation I could do with job search essentials. So we talked about some other things too, and I'm reinventing the wheel a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about more specifically about the compensation and compensation negotiation, and a little bit about what goes into compensation when you're looking at different companies. So I'm certainly open to using my background if there's any other questions, and talking about transition, certainly willing as a recruiter to answer any of those questions as well. So this is kind of new for me to present on on Zoom, and also so not in front of a room. So I don't know if I've done that a lot here, at least recently too. So I might be kind of navigating back and forth a little bit. So my apologies if kind of that happens. I'm gonna go to my screen, and I'm actually gonna, I think, stop my video, and I'm gonna share my screen here. So I have my PowerPoint in front of me. Let's hopefully hope that works. Let's see if that does. All right, you're probably seeing all my stuff here. Let me see if I can get the PowerPoint up and running.
That looks good.
How's that working for everyone? Great. And you can't see me, right? So when I put my cheaters on like this and look at my notes, you can't see. That's good. Perfect. I like this. Well, obviously, I've already introduced a little bit about what I wanted to talk about tonight. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. Jason Pouliot. I mentioned I'm
I text you, Mom. I already.
Recruiter. Can you hear me okay, guys? Did I hear something? Okay. Yeah, just jump in if I need to check a note or something that somebody's chatting with me. I'm not seeing that on my screen right now. But anyway, I'm a corporate recruiter with a lot of experience in what I call high volume recruiting, non-exempt or hourly positions, as well as professional or exempt positions. Salaried positions. I've recruited at the director level and executive level across a pretty big variety of industries. So I would say my industry experience probably is related to transportation, distribution, manufacturing, warehouse, engineering. We've done a lot of scientific and R&D engineering type recruiting, a little bit of accounting, finance, and spent probably a good portion of my time in finance, sales, and marketing as well. So I mentioned I'm a Marine veteran, and also spent time in the Minnesota Army National Guard. So I'll just spend a few minutes, because of the group here, talking a little bit about that background. So you maybe know a little bit more about me, and maybe there's some relatable items for us mutually here. I did finish my bachelor's degree after my time in the military. And I've got probably about 15 years plus in human resources recruiting. Obviously, there's a big difference between recruiting as a human resources professional with a company versus recruiting externally as maybe a headhunter or through an agency. So just wanted to note that. I have spent a short amount of time working with an agency, so certainly respect those that work kind of in the agency world as well. But I didn't do a good job of proofing this, so if I come across any errors, feel free to message me. I want to make sure I correct those if I use this presentation again. But I am married with children. I would say I'm a half empty nester. Our two oldest are finishing off their college degrees, and our youngest two are still at home. The youngest is a sophomore in high school, and decided to start playing football this year, which is a fantastic year to start doing that. And I'm kind of joking about that, right? COVID, cold weather, and all those things that go along with it. the picture there is my backyard in New Hope. So that's our deck. You can't see that part of that's a work in progress, but it looks like a pretty picture. My wife took that last year. And obviously I was practicing my next profession as a beer taster. You can see from the picture there. My military career, and I inserted a picture of the Marine Corps ball. So that's the cake that gets cut every year. If you're not a Marine, you don't know that tradition. It's the youngest and oldest Marines that take the first slice of cake. And had I had more planning time to prepare, I would have maybe cut a little cupcake here or something, but nothing like that's planned for this evening. So at least not for the camera. I was active duty from 89 to 93 in the Marine Corps. Went to boot camp in San Diego, same place my father went. So that was probably one of the last memories I had. My father, he passed away kind of during my time in the military, actually. So it was a great experience to be able to share some of those memories with him. From basic training, I went to security forces school in the East Coast, served aboard the U.S. Theodore Roosevelt. That was during the Gulf War. I like to say during my elevator speech to any veterans, I served on the newest, most advanced technology vessel at the time, the Theodore Roosevelt, and then later on one of the oldest. But I was active during Desert Storm. So actually when it was us and the USS America that made it through the Suez Canal and into the Red Sea, that was when they started the air war. If I have to think back, I think that was January 16th. So I was actually at near the flight deck at the time and got to see those air flying off and kind of realizing that, yep, they were loaded with bombs that evening. So kind of something noteworthy to share. Just kind of some of those things during the start of the air war. And then I think a couple of things, we got to do a mission with SEAL Team 6 during that time. So it was kind of a unique experience for, a 20-year-old at that time to be kind of going through a lot of those things. After the Gulf War, I went and finished my time off with the infantry and actually did a med float with the 22nd MEU during that time. And that was the oldest ship in the military at the time, an old LST. So the going through the North Atlantic in one of those is not pretty. So totally different from life on a troop ship versus an aircraft carrier. So pretty unique experience. And then I did serve some time in the Minnesota Army National Guard and got to do the Norwegian troop exchange, and then deployed with our unit to Greece as well too. And most of our unit ended up climbing Mount Olympus. So some pretty unique experiences during my time in the military. I'm very appreciative of having that time, and I would absolutely do it again. So thanks everyone for your service again. I'll probably say that repeated times, but if anybody served during kind of some of that same times that have similar stories, feel free to let me know. It'd be great to talk a little bit more about that. So I wanted to kind of talk again here about, compensation expectations. This is something that I deal with on a regular basis. And I think I sometimes become a little bit more numb to it and kind of need to refocus on kind of what some of those things that happen during a job search. Right now, I'm actually working with a lot of hourly type of candidates. So that's given me maybe a good pause to kind of revisit on some of those things. A lot of folks have expectations based off maybe where they were at previously, what their skill set is, and trying to marry that into a company's maybe structure and still try to stay competitive is definitely a challenge sometimes. I think that every organization is a little bit different. And right now I'm actually working as a consultant. So it's certainly different, like I said, when you're trying to maybe understand what a particular company, Chart Industries, the one I'm with now, what they have is kind of selling points and matching some of those things up with candidates. I think a lot of the experience I have in the past is working with companies that have compensation or salary ranges. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. This slide really is really about the candidates and you as a job seeker, trying to understand your compensation expectation and really what that looks like and where you need to be. I went through a layoff this summer myself, so I had to revisit that, as well as my wife. She was actually went through a reduction with her employer as well too. So it was pretty personal this past summer. So I certainly am refreshed to what all the job seekers are going through out there. For me, I can certainly give a couple examples. When I first started my search, I took a couple different approaches. I was looking at going back to consulting, where I knew the money would be a little bit higher, but also looking for a little bit of a job change for myself, knowing that recruiting was down, but as a human resources business partner, I might be better poised in that market. So those are a couple of examples, and not knowing what some of those companies were maybe going to pay was certainly a challenge. So I came up with my own little answer of what that looked like. And I started with what unemployment paid, and then some of those incentives on top of that, what the job opportunity might present, and kind of use that as my foundation. So taking an approach for a direct hire position within a certain scope for a full-time job, but also having a different expectation for what I might find as a consultant out there. So I'm not sure if individuals are taking some of that same approaches, but it's something you need to look at your background and look at the market and see what that means. So I'm trying to transition here my screen again, but know how to answer that compensation question, right? What to expect in the market, the industry, and the company. So like I mentioned, the consulting, totally different than what I was going to expect with a direct hire. But take in mind and consider what you're going to need. I mentioned when my wife was also affected, that changed for me what I might need. It put maybe a little bit more onus on benefits, for example. We had a situation where there was a continuation of benefits for her. So it changed a little bit during my search and what that looked like and what I was going to focus in on. So take some of those things into consideration as far as what you need. And I think those can change throughout your search, and they can even change throughout your career as well too. So I wanted to make sure that those were kind of some of the things that you're thinking about when you're going into a understanding what your compensation expectations should be. And these are a slide I just put together. What some of those things are they might be obvious, they might not be obvious, but the stability of an organization, benefits, growth opportunity, maybe it's independence, maybe it's vacation time or work-life balance. Are your contributions valued? I think certainly those are some things that give you a little bit more job satisfaction. If you're part of the big picture, maybe of an organization. And if you really have the opportunity to demonstrate and use those skills, right? I think just like anything, if we're not using some of the skills that we value, they can certainly atrophy over time. So maybe those are some of the things that you really want or need in an opportunity. Lead projects or lead teams. I think sometimes those are some good things that maybe make one opportunity a little bit more valuable over another. The commute, the ability to work from home. Certainly we could talk a little bit about COVID in there and maybe how comfortable you might feel in an environment in the COVID situation. So a lot of different things to look at, but those are certainly with COVID puts a definite weight on some of this as well. Competitive compensation. I think making sure we have a good competitive perspective where you're going to be able to feel like you're valued and the compensation is going to align with the company and what you're looking for. And then just general strong company leadership. Does the company have leadership that you're looking for. Go to my next slide here. So just some things to, and again, some of this might be obvious, some of it might not be obvious to a lot of you. And I'll use my wife as an example. She actually went to work for a private company, and they're really starting off, but there's certainly have a reputation and there's stability there. You can often find, good benefits there, flexibility, but it's going to depend on maybe how that private company is structured. They're a little bit of a startup in her situation as well. So sometimes there can be a degree of risk going into some of that. If you know the company, in this situation, my wife's familiar with some of their business, it becomes a little bit less risky as you meet individuals in that organization, or maybe you're aware of some of the things they've done from a project standpoint or what they've produced. But ultimately those startups, they're going to present a good opportunity for growth. So sometimes one of those things I don't think I have mentioned on any of my intangibles, if you will, is maybe title. So that could be something with a startup where you might be able to negotiate or have a title that might be a little bit more attractive in your career. And then obviously the stability, I think just the ability to really learn and maybe get to maybe wear more hats is maybe also an advantage worth noting. Okay, I'm becoming a little bit more familiar with kind of the dashboard, if you will, as I go along here too. So if I'm smiling, it's because I figured out how to stop the video and make sure that I'm seeing any messages from any of you guys. I don't think I have any just yet, but so on to the next slide here. These are maybe some of the other companies that you might come up against. And again, I'm reinforcing some of this. Your job search might change. How you approach that compensation question might change a little bit for each one of these companies. And I think, if it's not obvious, each of these companies, each of these environments are going to be different as far as what they're going to be able to offer you, maybe from a compensation standpoint or from a benefits standpoint. So thanks. I see a couple jabbers going in. So thanks for the encouragement. All right. Appreciate that. Thanks, guys. Another Marine out there, it looks like, Semper Fi. Back to I think I missed one of my slides. Okay. The Fortune 100 companies, yeah, you're good if you're applying to General Mills or let's say a well-known strong company. There's obviously going to be good degree of stability, benefits. They might be more advanced with some of the things they're offering, right? Because of maybe they're a global organization and they're trying to recognize maybe some of the European standards or some of the laws that are passed in California. So going in there, they might have some of those things that are benefits that are not going to compete with any of those private companies or smaller organization or mom and pop companies. So it's going to be a different comparison. Just like the government positions, I always encourage people, don't forget about government opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities out there. I think we all know or might be aware that process is going to be a little bit slower, but there might be a little bit more stability. There's going to be maybe more defined processes. The pay might be lower to some regards, but there might be some other benefits that, even things out a bit. So this is just a couple buckets for you guys, for everyone to kind of be aware of and kind of get those ideas going as far as what you need to consider when you're talking about compensation. I like to ask candidates what they're looking for in the next opportunity, and it's an open question. So candidates kind of caught off guard a little bit by that. They say, "What do you mean? Are you talking pay or are you talking other things?" And I ask that for a reason, because usually I'll get a good response on really what they're looking for in general. And I'll try to open them up to other ideas just to learn a little bit more about them. But ultimately, I change that conversation. I try to get to a number, right? I need to associate if it's somebody we're going to be able to afford and how they're going to fit into that structure. So most companies are going to ask this during the application process. So be prepared for that as you're filling out an application. And then also some might ask for salary history, and that might be a little bit more antiquated, but it's kind of the reality. Some companies might have that as an older part of their process, but it's not updated. Some might not be there as far as the sign of the times and what companies should or are asking today. So just be prepared for some of these things. And if you have a salary history, it might be a question that you have to ask on that question. If you can avoid it, it might be best to try to avoid that and talk more about that when you get on the call with someone. Ultimately, you might need to get that information to them before you'll get to that next step. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 there from some regards. That's where the research of the company, being prepared going in might help you out a little bit there. Certainly the recruiters, the HR team, the hiring managers, at least some members are really going to probe into that a little bit further, probably even after that first one or two conversations, whether it's the application or the next piece of that compensation question. So a question, how does the salary history or current salary affect an employer's starting salary point for the new position? So hopefully I'll answer that question here in a second. Thanks, Mike, for asking that. How do I describe my salary history? I'm active duty and I have housing allowance, flight pay, etc. Yeah, exactly. Those are really great questions. Hold on for just a second. I think I'm going to get to those in the next point, guys. Thanks for asking those. And there's a website for calculating those. Alan's chiming in, so that's great. Great resource to add. I would say let's try to deflect some of those tables if you can, or turn the tables and work that to your advantage when you're asked some of these questions. It might be, this right here might be a good time when you're conversing with somebody to bring up some of those things you just mentioned, as far as what other things you were paid for, flight deck pay. Sometimes it's even C-pay or housing allowances that you're getting. And I think Alan mentioned there's a website that can calculate some of those things. Even employers do that to some degree. Some employers, let's say like the General Mills, they'll give you a statement that says what your total compensation package is. I remember being at one of the larger companies I worked for, and they did that. And boy, I thought I was hit pay dirt, where I was really where I needed to be. But again, they were talking about total compensation, not just my starting wage. But they are important things. Companies do pay for them. So they're an important element. They may not, you may be looking for that right amount of money that's going to hit your bank account, be able to pay all your bills. But all those other things are very important. And we talk about housing allowance. To me, that's maybe one of the most important to add into, because that's really is a big part of your cost of living, right? Paying the mortgage or having a place to live. So how do employers know what to pay you? So, the corporate roles I've been in, there's going to be a whole compensation team that's going to work on global and local salaries to make sure they're paying the right amount to keep people around, to incentivize their salespeople enough to make sure the company can survive. So salary surveys are kind of a part of what a recruiter world is going to live in. Sometimes those might be dated on the company side. Sometimes they might be really accurate. Again, that goes into the company that you're applying for. Think about what they might have at their disposal. There's also going to be a salary range. So even if you're really have the advantage of getting a salary range, most companies are going to take the approach that the salary range is going to be it's going to take the market point, right? What they're finding in all their research that everyone pays in the market. They're also going to increase that, maybe 15 or 20%, depending on the company on the higher end. And they're going to do that the same way, kind of on the negative side, down 15 or 20%. So they might be looking at saying that somebody that matches up with the job description, they have the right amount of years of experience, they're going to be closer to the mid-range. Somebody that has more experience might be closer to the top of the range. Somebody that maybe doesn't meet all the requirements or might be a little bit lower will be lower in the range. I think it's also important to note that they're going to be looking after the salary range, they're going to be looking at internal equity. So internal equity is maybe what they're paying others to do the same job internally in that organization. So if you've had an organization that has a lot of people that have been promoted internally, that internal equity could pull what companies are willing to offer down a little bit, because typically pay increases internally in an organization don't always compete with what you might be getting externally in the marketplace. So just some of those things to be aware of. I don't know if this is rocket science or if this is helpful information, but just keep some of those things in mind. What might cause an employer to keep some of those things down, or maybe just makes it a little bit more uncomfortable for them. Market demands, certainly when a company is in a growth stage, when they've hit crescendo, or maybe the demands for production or for your skills are extremely high, that's to your advantage. And it doesn't necessarily mean a good economy or a bad economy. It's dependent on that company and where they're at that point in time. So I think some of those things I've seen ebb and flow where there's an economic downturn, but a company is not willing to pay less because they really want to make sure they're keeping people around. And I'm not seeing that from my perspective. I think companies are continuing to pay what a normal market would demand. I think companies are maybe wise to the fact that if they're not continuing to pay that, it might cause some challenges. But ultimately, it gets down to what a company can afford to pay. And sometimes what a company can afford to pay is based on that hiring manager. If that hiring manager has a strong budget, if he has maybe a P&L responsibility, it might be more on what he or she are going to determine versus maybe what HR is going to dictate. But again, that's going to be a little bit more dependent on the organization, where that manager is. If it's a sales person or a sales leader, I like to say the closer you get to the money, the more of an ability you might have to negotiate sometimes. So that might be something to keep in mind as well when you're looking at some of these things. Somebody let me know how we're doing on time. I know this is kind of a meeting set up to be like 20 minutes or so. So I think I'm most of the way through my slides, but if somebody wants to chime in and let me know how I'm doing on time, that would be great. This is something I wanted to bring up as well, because salary history, it's become a legal or illegal question in some states, depending upon how that state approaches it. So these are some of the states in orange that are kind of on the pathway to making it, more of an illegal question. Illinois is one of those that's been, I think, fairly progressive. They were also pretty progressive with convicted felonies and kind of shaping things. Obviously, California is another. Pennsylvania, I know, is another that's kind of been on the forefront. So you can kind of see how that's transitioning across the U.S. It's just kind of an interesting map, I think, to look at. But a lot of employees are handling it differently. For me, as a corporate recruiter, when I was recruiting for companies in Minnesota, we really need to approach it from if you're a corporate recruiter, from a company-wide standpoint. So picking how you're going to ask questions state by state is not always a good way to do it. So that's why companies, I think, today like to focus on what your salary expectations are versus what you were making. I don't think it necessarily hurts. It's a personal decision, but I don't think it necessarily hurts you to maybe tell what you're making. I think that makes you maybe a more transparent candidate. But again, putting out a number really limits you as far as maybe your ability to negotiate, or maybe can hold you back from where maybe you want to be or where you need to be. So just be cognizant of that. That's one reason that states put this into law, is because of some of the the great disparate impact on kind of some of that. I didn't see any note. Did anyone chime in timing wise? Am I still connected?
We still see you. You're still here.
Great. All right. So is there kind of a time limit we have?
It looks like you're getting pretty close to it. It looks like we should leave some time for questions though, because obviously
okay.
most people are looking for
questions. Okay, great. I'll try to wrap this up here then. Just back real quick to the couple slides. So in kind of some of the things I was looking at with negotiating salaries, I came across some Chris Voss stuff that was really pretty good. So if you don't know who Chris Voss is, I'd encourage you to take a look at him. He's a negotiator for the FBI, but he says, never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. So keep that in the back of your mind. You can certainly ask for benefits, maybe lower that effective date if you really need the benefit sooner. Paid vacation. Paid vacation is probably the #1 thing that I've been with companies where they're willing to negotiate on. Not every company, but most companies are willing to give you maybe a couple extra days. If you ask, you might get it. If you don't ask, they're not going to give it to you likely. Start date. If the start date's important to you, I think that's a good thing to certainly bring up and ask if they're negotiable on that or if they're flexible. Signing bonus, relocation, vehicle allowance. Sometimes that can work out. One of the things my wife was given with her opportunity was they didn't want to process the reimbursement for mileage on a regular basis because they're a small company. But what they did do is they gave her a flat amount for a vehicle allowance on a monthly basis. So that was really a great thing. So keep in mind what size organization and what you might want to negotiate. The work schedule, flexibility, those are things that are important to do, I would say, early on in the process if you can, once you get the offer. Talk to the manager about what that flexibility looks like. You might not want to say, go into specifics on what kind of flexibility you need, but I think just being upfront and bringing that question up is important, as well as the pay rate, even just upgrades. If you're traveling 100%, ask if it's possible to get the upgrades for international flights, if that's an important thing for you. If you're a big person, if you're want to be able to stretch out, that's something I've seen negotiated before. Again, it depends on the size of the organization and maybe a little bit about the position as well. Again, you can't get if you don't ask. Here's just some kind of examples of how to ask that. I'm used to 3 weeks of vacation with 10 paid holidays. Is there any flexibility in regard to your time off? And here's another example. I think this offer is in the range for a senior marketing manager, but with the industry contacts and familiarity with the software you're implementing, I feel I can bring a lot to the table. Companies probably know that, but it never hurts to maybe reinforce some of these statements. So I'm just giving you a couple there to bring top of mind. Negotiating the offer. Again, I think I talked about this just a little bit, but what can you get and what can't you get? It's going to depend on the organization and sometimes the value you bring. Certainly the industry, maybe the level of desperation you have, but as long as you understand the timing of your decision, if they're giving you the weekend, it doesn't hurt to ask a couple of these questions just to probe. I think the more options you have, if you've got a couple offers at the same time, that obviously gives you a little bit more leverage. But certainly it never hurts to ask some of these things and really think through how you're going to ask them and maybe share a couple of those ways you're going to ask with some maybe mentors or folks maybe that even work in the organization to see how that might go across. Because some organizations, what you're asking for might sound crazy, and some it might not be anything at all to them.
Rhonda asked a question in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Rhonda. And I'm getting to the end here too, so I'll go ahead and if you want to fire away questions or take yourself off mute. So Rhonda asked, will companies adjust healthcare for an increase in pay if healthcare is not needed? That's an excellent question. Some companies are doing that. I think it's a great thing because, a lot of families, there's two people working and only one of your household members is probably going to take part of that. But not all companies will do that because it's already kind of factored in into their costs. I know with some of the benefits directors and compensation directors I've talked to, they really do try to bring that to light. Depends on kind of the organization and kind of some of their some of their restraints if they are able to do that or not. So not every company is going to, but I would certainly ask that. It is, if it's a smaller company, it's certainly great for them to know that because it's probably going to cost them less in the long run and make you a more appealing candidate. They can't ask you that. But if you volunteer that certainly might be maybe a little bit more appealing thing for them to have in mind. A great question. All right, I'm not seeing any new questions come in. I'll kind of go back. Hopefully I've answered those other questions that maybe Mike and some of the others asked. So Mike, your question, just going back, how does our salary history or current salary affect the employee's starting salary? Yeah, so I think if I know where somebody's at, that might motivate me some as a recruiter. And maybe a better example is if I know somebody's making $22 an hour at another company, and our range is maybe going to be closer to 24. I might ask them more questions about maybe how that company compensates them. Maybe the positions and benefits and pay are really equal. Maybe we're just maybe have better benefits. Maybe we have more time off. So I always try to find out when I hear what somebody's salary is why are they paid that? Is it competitive to what we have in our offering? That gets to the value proposition a little bit. But hopefully I'm asking your question, Mike, because I think that's one of the reasons some of those laws were passed, because I think there was a push to try to avoid some of those discrepancies in pay, and not asking for salary history is one of those ways of doing that.
Yeah, and part of my concern, or part of the reason I was asking that specific question was, do you end up lowballing yourself, when you're talking about, say, my pay is $22 and normally the company will pay $26, but they have a range of $24 to $28, for example. Yeah. Because I'm getting paid $22 now, will that company kind of just start bracketing me into the $24 range, and then I have to work my way up to even the middle? Yeah.
Thanks to you guys that joined us. It looks like a couple folks have to run, so thanks for joining. Hopefully this information was helpful. To get back to your question, Mike, yeah, it can. You can certainly end up in a position if you're sharing compensation where they do lowball you. I think most organizations, when you get a recruiting team around a table, they're going to try to be more competitive, and they're not going to want to bring in somebody too low that it's going to be a concern down the road. But it does happen, and it really does sometimes depend on the position and what that person might be bringing. If they are really valuable, I don't think they're gonna lowball somebody too much, if that makes sense.
Jason, have you seen much in terms of companies being willing to share the salary range for a particular position? They want transparency from you. I'm just curious if they, it's probably not frequent, but I'm just curious what your experience has been there.
Yeah, it's a great topic of conversation, isn't it? If you ever get in front of a compensation director or manager, ask them that question. We all know who the highest paid state employee is, don't we? It's the football coach, right? States have transparency in their ranges. The government has transparency in their ranges, but the private companies, it's different. There are some folks that like to be a little bit more transparent. Certainly a lot of organizations will share the salary ranges. And some companies have what they call pretty simple bands. So they're 1 through 10, maybe a little bit more with what we're familiar with some of the government, the GS ratings and whatnot. So some companies have it a little bit more simple, similar to that. So it's pretty much any managers are in one level, and maybe hourly employees are in another level, or manufacturing. There's other companies that make it much more complex, and it's position by position. Engineer 1, 2, 3, or 4, and there's various ranges there too. So some of those are a little bit more public within an organization, to the leadership team and to managers. And sometimes those numbers are transparent to, let's say, the sales team, because it goes into the margins and how much they're bidding. So if the salaries grow up, it's going to affect the margins. But you're right. I think it would be good if there's more transparency in ranges, but companies share that data with one another periodically, either through the salary informations they get, or sometimes human resources groups, what they'll do is they might do salary surveys with a few other companies, maybe that aren't directly competing, but there is some of that happens in the marketplace to some degree. But does that maybe answer your question a little bit about ranges being public?
It does. I'm just trying to get a handle on, what your experience has been. I've been pretty upfront about asking the question with some companies going, okay, I know this is, where I have targeted a particular salary, but can you tell me what's the range for this position? So it kind of opens up the conversation a little bit more broadly, rather than, I've got this secret and I'm not going to tell you what it is that we're going to pay, but I want to know what you want. And it really puts you in a disadvantage when you're trying to negotiate.
Absolutely, it does, and it works both ways too. I just lost a candidate earlier today. We were maybe below his expectations a little bit, but I think the positive that I got out of it, and I just was messaging the manager just before we came on this call. He said, "No, wait a minute. I think we might have more room there." Right. So where does that room come from? We had we can look and see if there's an established range, but ultimately it's going to depend on the organization, a little bit on the manager, and maybe what things are on the horizon, because there's a particular candidate there that has a skill set that we know we're going to need in a short period of time. And our maybe internal talent pool is not the same way there too. So in that situation, we had 2 positions that are open, very similar. So we did see candidates with varying levels of skill. So it works both ways. It really does.
Plus, the government actually asks companies what they pay, and they are required to answer that. In a couple of weeks, Tim O'Neill, one of my coworkers, will be presenting on that kind of stuff.
Keep me up to date on that, Stephen. I'd like to maybe sit in on that if it's a open conversation. But you're right. When we post jobs with some of the schools,
it's on this meeting here. He will be presenting here.
Oh, great. I know when we post some of our hourly jobs, the schools require it because they might have seen students getting very low paying jobs, and they want to maintain a certain dollar amount as well. And some schools, let's use the U of M as an example. The career services is going to give a lot of that information on what employers are paying to their students, to make sure that the students are, maybe aware of what that is, so they don't end up with a lower offer. So there's a lot of education that does happen, I think, out there to make folks aware. But that's a great point. I think that the government is right on kind of approaching some of that too, so companies are maybe upfront with some of those positions. And I think we're seeing some laws passed now, I think, with kind of some of the CEO disclosures that have been happening too, where compensation teams on larger companies are having to report some of that. And I know it gets deeper into what the difference is between the top paid person in an organization and bottom. I think there's some data that they're starting to be requirements to report out on some of that as well.
So Alan put in the chat when Tim O'Neill, my coworker, is going to be presenting.
great.
I just had a comment when you were talking about, I think right here on the negotiating the offer, you had some sample ways to pose the discussion so that you're not just taking what they offer and not, you know, seeking a little bit more beneficial package for yourself. And maybe this is obvious to folks if, you know, if you're not active or haven't been in this role of having to find a job many times. Some of us have done this many times, but make sure you're asking open questions as opposed to yes, no, instead of saying, are you flexible on work from home or vacation time? Make sure you pose it as how much flexibility do you have? And put the onus on them to really box in what the answer should be versus you're letting them off the hook with a simple yes or no, can't do that kind of thing.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for bringing that up. I have seen some, you know, a good negotiator, a good candidate will bring maybe 3 or 4 items to the table. Maybe even one that they know is a cream puff. I don't know. Sometimes that might be good intentional to kind of maybe get one easy thing, but there might be 3 or 4 things they're looking for. And that's a good way to maybe kind of test the waters. Is the company going to move on any of these? So the company might come back and give you some options. It never hurts to ask, you know, I mean, even for a student that's relocating, is there any flexibility? Is it possible to get, you know, a couple $1,000s in a sign-on bonus to maybe help me with my relocation? So those are some, it never hurts to bring up a couple, 2, 3 items. If there's certain things that are at the top of your list, those you'll want to maybe bring up first. So. Just kind of reading some of the comments here. Check out the book, Never Spit on the Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Yes, that's one that I've heard is very good. Yeah. And Chris Voss, he's got some great videos out there too. So if you haven't checked him out, that's good. There's another one out there, and I meant to throw it in the link. There's a, you know, a lot of YouTubers out there, but there's one that I shared with one of the job groups I was a part of that really kind of gives a short summary of how to put compensation expectations together and really how to negotiate. If anyone hasn't done so already too, pay scale, I noticed that in there. Pay scale was really an innovator of kind of doing that as far as putting what your education is and your skills and tying that to a wage. For quite a while, this is probably going back into early 2000, compensation managers really kind of scratched their heads at that. But pay scale, I forget what the acquisition was, but I think there was some, they started really looking at some of the outliers. So pay scale did end up really, I think, validating what some of the compensation people had as far as concerns. So I think pay scale is actually a pretty good one to look at. But again, it might be off depending upon what company you're looking at. But I think it's a good benchmark for everyone to look at is see what should be paid in pay scale.
Awesome. Are there other questions that people have about this relevant topic? Money?
Money.
Cool. Well, if not, I'm going to stop the recording.